Let's go back in time, 1921 to be precise. A man named Alfred Watkins is visiting Blackvardine in England on a beautiful, well, if England has such a thing, summer day. On June 30, Alfred was pondering what sight to see, and while poring over the map, he noticed something. A straight line could be drawn from Croft Ambury, over hill points through Blackvardine, over Risbury Camp, ending at the high ground over at Stretton Garrison, a location Watkins assumed to be the top of an old Roman garrison. When looking closer on the map, Watkins started to note more location within a straight line. And this could not just be simple chance according to Watkins. Alfred explains the origins of these lines as follow. Presume a primitive people with few or no enclosures, wanting a few necessities, as salt, flint flakes, and later on metals, only to be had from a distance. And the shortest way to such a distant point was a straight line. The human way of attaining a straight line is by sighting, and accordingly all these early trackways were straight. Watkins postulated that these ancient people took their sightlines from peaks, of course not higher than 300 meters or 1,000 feet, but getting your lay on the land, you get it, so to say, is one thing, but how did they keep their direction while they were off the peak? To maintain these straight trade routes, Watkins claimed that they built mounds, circular earthwork, and other artificial markings. These mounds and monolithic monuments were later repurposed into burial or cult sites, but their original function was a waymarker. But they could also plant clusters of tree or use natural formations as water and stones to mark out the route for the wanderers. Watkins was not the only one having these ideas. As Keith Fitzpatrick Matthew pointed out, an article was published on a similar theme just 30 years prior, titled Ancient Trackways in England. This paper was published in the Antiquary, volume 19, in 1889, and written by an architect named Joseph Houghton Spencer. And our architect friend had a similar thought to Watkins. And Houghton started his paper with an anecdotal account on how he saw Barton Grange, a broad pathway about 600 feet, which is crossed by another by the same length, thus forming a Greek cross. Spencer suggests that there are these straight lines connecting locations in the landscape, and that there are astronomical connections. But what Spencer failed to research was what we were looking at was most likely the old remains of the Barton Grange Old Gardens. Looking back at the map from Barton Court, we see this feature being part of the garden area. Yikes. While both Watkins and Spencer had a similar idea, Watkins is the origin for the ley lines as we know them today. But Watkins most likely didn't know about Spencer's article published 30 years earlier. But that's kind of the thing, the ideas aren't that strange actually. The human mind is quite excellent in finding patterns, and it's almost hardwired within our brains. This is how we can interpret a shadow of a lamp to be a person, or how we see shapes in the clouds. Random noise can turn into some sounds we can understand or see writing in, random places. So what Watkins and Spencer have committed is a type 1 error. They have a false positive and believe something to be true while it's not. And today we can be reasonably sure that these ley lines are nothing more than coincidence. We know the site were constructed at widely different times and had large diverse purposes. The archaeological dating has become so good that Watkins' idea of these Neolithic straight trade routes are simply impossible. These ley lines are also selected with a bias. Locations from different times and eras that fit are included within the lines, and other sites that do not fit are simply left out. So while the science the science isn't there, I want to highlight that neither Watkins nor Spencer seems to have any claims about spirits, energy forges, or UFOs. These are things that got introduced later when the ley line idea got adopted by the New Agers. We briefly looked at ley lines back in episode 13 when Giorgio Tsoukalos claimed that there is a line between Calais in France and Calais in Italy. And even when he made up a bunch of locations that do not exist in France or Switzerland or Italy for that part, he could not really get that ley line straight. Unfortunately, we will witness that the ancient alien crowd has yet to learn their lesson, because Giorgio described ley lines as
something extraordinary happened along those ley lines because the once very physical and real visit of extraterrestrial beings has been forgotten.
So the idea is simply that the ley lines was some sort of navigation system for the aliens who were visiting Earth. My best guess is that they left some unquantifiable energy that maybe New Agers believe and talk about on these different sites. And let's for a moment set aside the fact that the believers are the only ones that can really measure these energies, and that the locations include places that range from Neolithic to overgrown gardens from the 1800s. What is the best evidence for the ley lines according to the ancient alienists? Shockingly, we will find it in Denmark, consisting of several round Viking fortresses. And these forts are known today as Trelleborgar. Let's start with some of these histories of these fortifications before we get into the ancient alien claim. Something worth noting is that fortification has been part of history for quite a long time, and the earliest examples of fortifications in Scandinavia can be found in Denmark and in southern Sweden in Skåne or Scania, and can be dated to Neolithic times. In Sweden, there are about 1,000 of these defense systems, most of which can be found around Mälaren Valley, and most of the intense construction period was during the migration period, that's 300 CE to 800 CE, and consisted of especially highlands forts, but also in some cases lowland forts. And the largest of these fortifications is Torsburgen on Gotland, and that wall stretching almost 2 kilometers. And Scandinavian fortification building of course continued during the Viking Age era, as settlements such as Vestergarn on Gotland, Birka in Stockholm and Hedeby in Denmark. And what makes Trelleborgar different is their design and the period in which they were built in. They are all circular, they have 4 ports aligned with the cardinal direction and were created within a very short time span. The gates corresponding with cardinal points seems to have been inspired by Flemish fortresses construction a bit earlier. And round fortifications, they are not new. For example, we have Ekeborg on Öland, but these are perfectly round and have a very identifiable layout. And the currently accepted Trelleborgar is, well, of course, the Trelleborg on Själland, Nonnebacken, Fyrkat, and Aggersborg. And we recently actually added another location, Borgring, also located in Själland. Then we have the question that might upset a few Danish listeners. Is there Trelleborgar in Sweden? And here we have an excellent example of regional identity influencing archaeology. There are 3 suggested locations in Skåne, Scania, Borgaby, which is more or less accepted as a Trelleborg today. We have Helsingborg, and then we have Trelleborg in Skåne is mainly with the last example in the Swedish city of Trelleborg, where Danish archaeologists are most skeptical about the definition. For a long time, some protests have been against classifying the ring fortification in Trelleborg as what the city basically is named after, and seems to indicate that this is. And that was mainly due to regional identity influencing these type of ideas, that Skåne would not have these ring fortifications simply. When were these ring forts built then? Here comes what's really fascinating. They're all constructed around 980 CE. The chronological test in Trelleborg on Själland showed that the construction started in the winter between 980 and 981 CE, and the logs of Fyrkat started to be cut down in 979. Agersborg was built maybe earlier. We see indication that a possible start date might have been around 970 CE. But this put the construction of the fortifications firmly within the reign of Harald Blåtand, or Harald Bluetooth. The one who that technology might use to listen to this is named after. And these ring forts all have identical layouts, or they almost have a similar layout, while Trelleborg and Fyrkat are split into 4 equal quadrants consisting of 16 longhouses in total. Agersborg consists of 12 quadrants and 48 longhouses. They are also strategically placed along important trade routes, except for Agersborg. None of them are built on previous settlements. While not placed directly by the water, except again Agersborg, they are relatively close by when you account for the land rise in Denmark. But their function was to keep peace within Denmark and not really to protect against outside raiders. So having them closer inland makes perfectly sense, to be honest. And Harald Blåtand's reign was lined with internal struggle, and it seems as Harald ordered these to be structured as an attempt to keep the peace. And their intended purpose appears to not have been working very well in the end, and just a few decades later, the fortifications was actually abandoned. Now, armed with all of this knowledge, let's see what mainstream science is trying to hide from you. Now, the aliens proponents are, as usual, claiming that the scientists are baffled. If we should believe these fringe theories, we seem to spend much of our times being very befuddled about everything. Except me, I spent very much time studying the Viking Age era navigation and the tools they used, and so we know how they simply can create these accurate cardinal points within the forts. A simple and yet foolproof trick thought in survival situations is, with different variation, the sunstick. And the most accurate version of this takes about a day, but you get very exact direction. And aliens proponents think it's far-fetched and suggest a more alternative explanation.
Given that the Vikings were basically seafaring people and these sites are spread out so far over land and great distances, it implies that maybe they had some other way of getting to these places. Perhaps they even were able to fly. Now, how they would fly, what the technology was, it's a good question, but it seems unlikely that they would be able to find all these spots, survey them, and place monuments and structures there if they were simply a seafaring race.
Michael Barr and others point out that the fortresses of Agersborg, Fyrkat, Eskeholm and Trelleborg are in a straight line. And looking at a map, they appear somewhat linear, but if we draw a line from Agersborg and Trelleborg, it will miss Fyrkat with about 1.5 kilometers. Isn't it a little bit strange that these surveying aliens would be that much out of course? Also, did you maybe react to the new name that suddenly appeared? The alien proponents do claim that there's a fort on Eskeholm, a small Danish island, except there isn't any known archaeological site there at all. They either somehow misinterpreted the location of Nonnebakken to be further west, or they simply just decided to move Nonnebakken to fit within their preferred ley line. And things do not get better when they try to connect these sites with other locations further south.
How could a straight line link ancient Egypt, the pyramids, the Oracle of Delphi in Greece, and Viking fortresses that would have been established thousands of years later? It made no sense. But it does make sense if these installations are along straight lines across the Earth's grid, and if somehow those straight lines marked navigation routes for ancient extraterrestrials that use them as markers to navigate the globe from society to society.
One important rule with ley lines is that the distances is not your friend. Can we get a line to get through all of these locations? The answer is sadly no. If we start in Aggersborg, aiming for the Giza Plateau, we will miss Fyrkat with 1.3 kilometers, Trelleborg with 11 kilometers, and Delphi with 306 kilometers. The ley line seems rather useless for navigation, to be honest, and the idea proposed by the alien theory is that these lines are flight paths, except that planes tend to fly in an arc, and that would be uncontroversial to assume aliens might have had a similar flying technique if they were flying around here on Earth. Even so, why would aliens want to connect this force that was used within such short time span? We know too much about these fortifications to be able to attribute them to anyone else other than Danish Vikings. And they clearly didn't need aliens to construct them, since they aim to keep the local rebellious people under control. The ley line theory isn't more than seeing patterns where there simply aren't any. And since I have done a whole segment about Denmark without making any snide remarks, I deserve a break and a treat. While I get myself a standard Danish breakfast, which consists of a 6-pack of beer and sausages, we have relocated to the Pacific Ocean.